1. The following has been assembled from my texts during my week-long stay at a hospital. This is our story. Having been admitted to the ER overnight, I was transferred to the second floor the following day for extended observation and treatment. I'm going to be fine. I was lucky enough to get a 2-person room to myself, overlooking the gravelled roof of the cafeteria and grey stone walls of the adjacent ward. Directly across the hall was also a patient with a 2-person room to herself, early-ish 20s, for reasons which will be made abundantly clear. From what I gathered, she has been in the ward since the previous day when I was sleeping in the ER. How do I know this girl? Girl is loud. She was talking to her friend on her cell phone about how she was pissed drunk coming back from a guy's house, not her boyfriend, pissed in her car and crashed. My introduction to her was actually a nurse telling her, and I quote, "Do you realize we're being cold with you? We're not giving you a lecture. You're old enough to know better." She might have whiplash or lower back problems because she's been put on morphine and was in a wheelchair. But that's not even the start. She was constantly screaming at other people, other patients. "Close your fucking jacket! I don't want to see your butt!" When they passed in front of her door. Mind you, she refused to wear the jacket, kept her single change of clothes and beanie hat. Also, don't fucking look. Also, just close your damn door. Hell. She even went into other patients' rooms and scolded them to properly tie their jacket. The patients are all elderly, so I never heard anything from them. Of course, she curses out the nurses for confiscating her smokes because she tried to light up in her room. "I'll fucking sue you!" Yeah, sure. When she got the evening meal, she yelled into the hallway because she doesn't like apple juice and wanted something different. She never rang the nurse bell, she just moans loudly when someone passes to try and get their attention. All the time. She talked to me once, the first night I was in the ward. After lights out, I got up. I had 2 tubes running into my arm and one going from my nose to my stomach. That one was fun. Hunched over and holding onto the drip pole, I shuffled to my room's bathroom. Each bathroom is in between 2 adjacent rooms, having a door opening to each side. This is important for later. As I was opening the door with difficulty, again being bent over, holding myself for support, dragging wires, she just states, "I can see your butt." She would have had to be sitting on the edge of her bed and peering outside her room purposely to even spot me between the curtains. My mind went to 2 places. The first and strongest instinct, 65% of me wanted to respond, "Then just don't look." Although the other 35% won out, thinking, "Nope, she has the crazy. Don't make yourself a target. De-escalate." So I calmly stated, "I'm going to the bathroom." This worked. I don't think she expected any response because she said the calmest thing I ever heard from her all week. Oh. Next morning, I think I was on a cocktail of drugs and time seemed to all meld together. All aboard the crazy train. I wake up to her yelling across the ward to the room diagonally across the hall from her, adjacent to me, sharing a bathroom, to an older person clipping their nails. "What's the fucking noise? Stop making that fucking noise! Ugh! Make it fucking stop!" She had also vomited in the bathroom in the morning and had asked a nurse for a doctor to look at it. Well, the doctor wasn't there yet. Well, a person in the other connected room had to go to the bathroom, so obviously they had flushed. Thus, Miss Bottle of Joy and Sunshine started yelling obscenities at her from her own room. "You fucking stupid cunt bitch, why did you flush?" etc., etc., etc. That got her nowhere, so instead, she decided to climb onto a wheelchair and run after a patient whose butt she saw, screaming, "I will rip off their jacket, it's fucking disgusting." No idea what happened with that, but she did come back soon after. I don't think anybody was assaulted. That night she called her actual boyfriend and started questioning him loudly about red dots on her crotch. She swears it's not from her because she was tested before being with him. Oh, and remember the reason why she was in the hospital in the first place, driving back from a guy's house. That mysteriously didn't come up. Through pressure on the boyfriend, he admitted to diddling a girl when he was at that girl's place. Miss Sunshine turned up her psychotic yelling to 11, trying to get him to admit to more, then locked herself in the bathroom. That did not help the sound volume situation. Later, Or next afternoon, I don't know any more drugs, IVs. Dinner and a show. She yelled at the nurses, saying that she did not want her side of the bathroom door locked, which you can unlock easily with a pushpin, because it wakes her up when the other patients go to the bathroom. I told them 6 times not to go to the bathroom, but they don't listen. She was back in bed, pressing the nurse call button, moaning loudly, calling out into the hallway she wants morphine. Nurse comes in. You're not due for morphine for another 27 minutes. Miss Sunshine. Before it was every 2 hours, now it's every 4 hours. What's it going to be next time, every 8 hours? Nurse. That's exactly right. More yelling. Then her dinner tray goes flying. Nurse. No, nope, no. Steps out into the hallway. Call a code white. Intercom. Code white, 2nd floor, E ward, room 2200, code white. 3 security guards come running in. Miss Sunshine is pinned down, under protest from her. Almost like trying to drown a cat with each hand at the same time. She's strapped down, legs, arms, wrists, neck. Resident doctor comes in, tells her she can wait or have 2 Advil. Miss Sunshine says, and I quote, "No! I don't want drugs that will mess with my mind." Doctor. You're taking morphine. That messes with your mind. A lot. She is then given a choice for the Advil, orally or suppository. The answer is, not in the mouth. So, she then learns what a suppository is. Remember how she is strapped down? Remember how she refuses to wear the jacket? Remember how she's still wearing her only change of clothing? The jeans are ripped. Crying is had, in between sobs all I hear is, "Ow! Ow! It burns! It burns! Ow! It burns!" All I can think of is, stop clenching. She is left strapped in, door closed. Reports and paperwork are made out in the hall. She is being left to scream and tire herself out until the meds and morphine kicked in. Silence in the ward is soothing and creepy. Shortly after, when it rains, it pours. Coincidentally, her grandmother came by to visit her. She somehow got a heads up. While still being strapped in, she's pleading to be unstrapped so her grandmother doesn't see her like this. Nurses aren't having any of it. Life pro tip: yelling, "What? Look how calm I am!" is not the best way to convince someone to unstrap you from a bed. Grandmother comes in and leaves maybe 45 minutes later. Miss Sunshine is still strapped in. Not much sound came from her room. Remember how she went into other patients' rooms and lectured them about not using her bathroom? Once her grandmother left, she starts yelling again. She says she wants to pee right before she pissed herself. Nurses responded, "Okay, well, all you had to do was cooperate. You had many chances. Now you have to wait in your pee." Cue full exorcist mode for about an hour. They finally unstrapped her after 3 or 4 hours. Honestly, no sympathy. She really needed to be strapped. Heck, she was one step away from assaulting other patients. They brought in a psych to listen to her, so kudos to the hospital. "They ripped my only pants. I peed my only pants. My pants are ruined." Well, guess now you have to wear the jacket. Funny how that works out. The next day, there is a doctor now consulting. They took away her smokes. They are refusing to give them to her, doc included. Suddenly, intercom, "Code white, 2nd floor, E ward, room 2200, code white." They called another code white because she was yelling and spat at a senior doctor who was listening to her. Cue security. Cue being strapped down again. Nurse told the guards to use face shields because she's a spitter and has unknown VD. She started cry-breaking. Finally breaking down, it seemed. The crying was different. A distinctive note of powerlessness underneath it all, unmistakable. But that was just an illusion because she went full psychotic as soon as they unstrapped her for the night. They closed all the doors in the ward. The nurses and nurse aides visited each patient and told them that the entire ward had been prescribed Ativan to help us sleep. Opt-in, of course, but it's there if we wanted it. The next morning, because of course she has a kid at that age, came to visit and I was discharged that afternoon. No idea what happened to her. Don't really care to find out. So to the girl across the hall, let's not meet. 2. This happened to me around December. I live in a city that has a 2.5-hour 911 response time. I live by myself in a fairly safe part of town. One night I went to my best friend's house to watch a movie and have dinner. He was trying to distract me because my ex-boyfriend had recently broken up with me, and I was heartbroken. I got back to my house around 10 p.m. and then decided to go to Walmart to buy cat food. When I got back from Walmart, someone had left a plethora of creepy stuffed animals outside my door. Their beady little eyes seemed to stare up at me, and I felt my heart sinking into my stomach as I looked back into the bear's eyes. One of the bears was actually a little stuffed horse, and it looked familiar to me, but I couldn't place where or how I had seen it before. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt like the bears were watching me, and someone else was also watching me. Almost like there was a pair of arms behind me reaching for me. Just this really weird, awful feeling. I called my best friend and sent him pictures of the bears. He was also really creeped out and asked me if I wanted him to go get me. I told him I thought it was fine, and I took a shower and got ready for bed. After I had gone to bed around 11:30, someone rang my doorbell once. I wasn't expecting anyone, and most of my friends know not to ring the doorbell to my house because I can only hear it in my office and in my bedroom. I went to go look and saw 3 men standing there. Terrified, I called 911, and they said they would get someone over there as soon as possible. Meanwhile, about every 2 minutes or so, the people kept ringing the doorbell. I wanted to stay quiet. I felt scared enough that I put my cat into a carrier and pulled us up into the attic of the house. The entrance to the attic is really hidden, and the fact that the house has an attic is not very apparent. I decided not to call my friend because I didn't want to put him in danger, and I wanted to stay as quiet as possible. I stayed in the attic for nearly an hour after the ringing stopped, and went back downstairs. No word from the cops. I figure that there are a lot of homeless people around the area, and sometimes they come and ask for blankets. I decided to go back to bed, but I was woken up by a banging on the door. I called the police again to see if it was them. It wasn't. I told them that this had been going on for hours and they still hadn't come, and that I was afraid the people at the door were going to try to hurt me. They told me they were having a very busy night, and they were trying to get there as soon as possible. The next thing I knew, I heard a banging on the back door. I started shaking, and decided the cops were probably not going to come and help me. So I called my friend. He told me to grab my car keys and try to set the alarm on the car, and to pack up the cat, keep the lights off, and that he and his 2 roommates would be there as soon as possible. I set off my car alarm, which was close to the backyard. The men weren't deterred and remained banging. I kept the alarm going though. I grabbed my cat and hid in the closet this time because I was too shaky to get us back into the attic. The banging continued on the back door as well as the front door, and then a 3rd banging started on my bedroom window. My friend and his roommate showed up within 5 minutes of me calling him. I heard my friend yell at them to get the fuck out of here, and that he was armed. The 3 men immediately retreated. My friend called me and told me that he was at the door and everything was okay. He stayed inside and comforted me, while his friend searched around to make sure the men were actually gone. His roommates came back inside and one of them looked like he had seen a ghost. He didn't want to tell me what he had found, but he felt like it wasn't safe for us to stay there. We packed the cat up again and left. When we got to their house, his friend told us that he had found a bunch of pictures of me, taken on an instant camera in an envelope, on the ground in the backyard. The pictures were of me from the evening, pictures of me getting home, me leaving my house, and me inside Walmart. I couldn't believe I had missed being followed, and that no one else had noticed people taking pictures of me in the Walmart. I called the cops again to tell them not to bother coming, that I wasn't there, and I wasn't even concerned about a burglary at that point. I lived with my friend for about 2 months before moving back into my house. Until last night, nothing had happened. Last night I was at a bar with a few friends, when I ran into my ex-boyfriend's best friend. He was belligerently drunk and came up to talk to me. In his drunken stupor, he revealed to me that he, my ex, and my ex's sister had been behind the 3 people behind the events of that night. and that my ex was hoping I would get scared, call him, and we would get back together. The whole thing ended up making so much more sense, as my ex had owned a camera store and had a ton of instant cameras, and I had seen the horse before in his mother's house. She used to keep it on the couch. So crazy ex-boyfriend. Let's not meet. 3. I was around 5 years old and my family moved to a small town in eastern Tennessee from Baltimore city center because my dad had been laid off. They were pregnant with my baby sister and my mom wanted to start anew closer to her family in a more rural area suited for raising kids. Or so they thought. My mom's sister, my uncle, my teenaged cousin and her parents all lived in the same neighborhood, and this house on a cul-de-sac had just went up for rent. My grandparents agreed to rent it for my parents until my dad could get on his feet and find work. It was a quiet neighborhood with a big yard in the back, but a very steep hill in the front. We had large steps that led up to the front door, from the gravel driveway below and a covered porch. Underneath those steps was a little storage area that the porch hung over, and a door to a small basement that only spanned about the living room, which sat atop. When I Google Maps the house now, it is completely closed in, but 30 years ago it was only closed in right under the steps, and obviously in the basement. A couple of years passed and nothing significant happened. My baby sister was getting ready to turn 2 and I was 7. My dad had gotten a decent job as a warehouse manager at the paper company, and worked during the day while my mom stayed home. Almost every day my grandmother and aunt would walk over, and while they were inside talking and having coffee, my sister and I would usually go outside on the front porch and play with dolls, or I'd read to her on the swing while my mom had her conversation. Usually they would migrate out to the porch and spend time with us on the porch swing until it got later in the afternoon and everyone would go home to start dinner. One afternoon the neighbor's daughter Nikki was over, and we were playing on one of those mats with tracks on it and my Hot Wheel cars. Lying down on our chests while we pushed the cars around, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a small twig sticking up from a hole at the other end of the porch near the swing. I sat up and asked Nikki if she saw it too. She was a little older and knew my cousin well, so she says, "Yeah, it's probably Devin messing with us." So we go over to it and pull, except when we did, whoever it was below pulled the twig back hard and gave me a splinter and made me fall. Pride wounded, I got my sister and went in to tell my mom, and Nikki went home. I'm not sure why I didn't mention this twig incident to my mom that day, to be honest. Maybe I thought it would get my cousin in trouble, maybe I was spooked, or maybe I was just 7 and careless. I just can't remember what I was or wasn't thinking. A couple of days later, I was outside on the porch alone while my sister napped, painting on an easel I had gotten from my grandmother. My mom was inside cleaning and I noticed again this twig sticking up from the hole. Mind you, there were roughly 20-some-odd steps up to our porch, so it's not like we were right on the ground. Someone had to be down there poking it up through the hole. I walked over to it and got down on my knees and said, "Devin," my cousin who was probably 13 or 14, "you're not going to give me a splinter again. I'm telling my mom." And that's when whoever it was replied to me in almost a whisper, "I'm not Devin." His voice sounded so low and scratchy that I couldn't make it out, so I leaned down and looked through the hole. I didn't see anyone, so I said, "What?" And he said, "Come down here. I want to play with you." I said, "I'm telling," and he very angrily said, "If you tell anyone, I will get you." So I screamed, ran in, and I told my mom. She came outside and looked all around but didn't see anyone. She called my dad at work and he came home early. They still didn't see anyone, but they did see the long twig under the porch, and an old table that had been up against the house moved to the middle. I remember my mom calling my aunt and telling her to tell my cousin to knock it off and stop messing with us. But I figure my aunt never said anything, otherwise they would have known it wasn't him. About a week passed by, and I had been so creeped out that I hadn't gone back outside at all. But time heals all wounds, I suppose, because when Nikki called and asked if I wanted to come over to her house to watch Lion King and build a fort in the living room, I was all in. Her dad worked graveyard, so whenever her mom would go somewhere during the day, it was so much fun to hang out with her. Her dad would sleep, and we would sneak and drink coffee and eat candies with the jelly in the middle from her parents' office. As long as we were quiet, and I called my mom before I left so she could watch me walk back over, we had a lot of freedom in those days. My mom watched me walk over, and we built a fort to pretend we were lions while we watched the movie. We were about halfway through the movie when we heard a knock at the door. We knew we couldn't open the door or wake up her dad, so Nikki stood away from it a bit and called out, "Who is it?" Thinking it may have been my mom. We didn't see anyone's shadow through the curtain on the door, and were too spooked to look when there was no reply. When they didn't knock again, we got back in our sheet fort and carried on. A few minutes later, we heard something under the house banging on the floor of the living room. Our houses were exactly the same layout, and the living rooms were directly over our small basement areas. We screamed and ran into her dad's room to wake him up. He got up and got a baseball bat and went to look outside. When he went to look in the basement, the door was wide open, and it was obvious that someone had been living in there. At the time, I didn't know what they found. I just assumed he'd made a bed and was someone homeless. My mom rushed over and they called the police. The cops took my statement from the previous week, and as kids, we were kept out of the mix. There were whispers, and we ended up moving to what is still my parents' current home a couple of months later. Nikki's family left that day and never stayed in their house again. It must have really screwed with them, because I ended up hearing that they divorced, and Nikki was arrested in early adulthood for something pretty terrible. A few years ago at a family reunion, the story came up, and my parents told my sister, who doesn't remember anything because she was too young, and I, that when they opened the basement, there were thousands of child porn pictures scattered everywhere, and photos of us 3 girls playing on the porch and riding bikes, photos of other kids at the park, etc. They ended up finding him and arrested him a few blocks away from our house that week. He was convicted of numerous sex crimes, including the rape of an 11-year-old girl in a neighboring city. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 289. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. It was kind of hard to stop, actually, to make sure I did some work tonight. I was playing the Rick and Morty game earlier, virtual reality, and there's a thing in there where you can combine objects, and you can just get completely distracted by grabbing random things from the garage and mixing them together. I figured out how to make big bottles of beer, so that was fun. Okay, with that I think I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.